there, and they've said it before in California. They basically made the point that these kids and their education is not the province of their parents. That their parents homeschool at the pleasure of the public school monopoly and at the pleasure of the government. And though they didn't outlaw homeschooling today, if that is true, they sure could outlaw homeschooling tomorrow. My wife, I should say, because otherwise she'd beat me up, homeschools our kids. And it just seems to me that we have a right to do that because they're our kids. But that's a fight today. That's a fight. You know, there's the bailout of Bear Stearns and all kinds of other bailouts. These are no longer really questions. There's a tiny slice of us who say, wait a second, that's, you know, but if you're a big enough business in America, you aren't allowed to fail anymore. And we all know what that leads to. If you can't fail because you're too big and the government keeps propping up, ultimately, the government isn't magic. And the failure just becomes bigger and bigger and bigger. Our economy is in some deep trouble, not because we don't have a vibrant, productive, tremendous economy, but because we have a government that is foolish and political and will wreck our country for their own political well-being today. I used to think that they had to do something about Social Security. I am now convinced that they won't do anything about Social Security until it hits the fan. Because to do it means they have to pay a tiny political price. And they would rather not pay that price, even if it means that tomorrow or next week or next year, the country goes down the tubes. Old people don't have money. Young people end up paying, you know, taxes that are outrageous, with no sense that they get anything in return. A friend of mine recently said, Grover Norquist, you may know who he is with Americans for Tax Reform, made the point at a meeting that so often when we talk about fixing Social Security, we're not talking about fixing it for people. We're talking about fixing the program on paper. In other words, let's prop up the program and make it solvent, not the recipients solvent. And that's likely to be what happens with any type of fix. It's not going to mean that, he also pointed out that the problem isn't in the future. The problem is right now. If you're under 50, you are not going to get any positive return. And if you're 25 or 30 or under, you're going to get a negative return. So the program's already a heck of a problem. But, you know, that, and of course, I could go on, and I could go on, and I could go on. We also have a little problem in this country. I know a lot of Republican friends who are, you know, kind of grinning and bearing it that John McCain's the nominee. And I know Libertarians kind of probably feel pretty darn good that you don't have to somehow hold your nose and pretend you like John McCain. I told a friend the other day that, you know, I can respect him about some issues, even issues I disagree with, where I think that at least he stands up and says what he believes. But that if someone doesn't like the First Amendment, it saves me the trouble of looking at the rest of what they have to say. McCain-Feingold is a bald-faced attack on freedom of speech. And it's not alone. They're doing it at the local level. I was on a radio show yesterday, a guy in Florida who the appeals court just threw out 13 counts against him. He had the audacity to send out a mailing talking about political candidates without a disclaimer. He was sentenced to 60 days in jail for that. We now live in a country where if you speak out politically, you may go to jail. Now, I can look at all these things, and what it tells me is that at the same time that my sense is, I worked on term limits, I work on initiative and referendum issues. I think the initiative process is the best thing since sliced bread. It allows, and you know, I'm not a big Democrat, I'm a small d Democrat, because I believe that where government has a role, that role ought to be determined and managed in a democratic means. And I believe that the initiative process allows the people to check the politicians, to go over their heads when need be, and that it's absolutely critical. It's brought us things like tax limits, term limits, eminent domain, real eminent domain reforms, all kinds of things. And it promises to do so in the future. So I see a country where that's absolutely off the charts. If you poll 75–80% of the people support it. They support term limits. They support all kinds of limits on government. So on the one hand, I look at our country and I say, this is a wonderful place. The public is more libertarian than it has been in decades. But on the other hand, I look at the government and this whole issue of limited government. I mean, what is it? Limited government, what's the opposite? Unlimited government? Who's for that? Well, if you watch the TV news, if you listen to politicians, virtually every single word that comes out of their mouth is support for totally unlimited government. There's no idea that someone says, oh, well, that might be nice in theory, but there's a thing called freedom, and the government doesn't have that power. Or people ought to be free, even if it means they don't wear their seatbelt just the way you want, or their 28-year-old isn't still in a car seat. Or someone rides a bike, heaven forbid, without their helmet. That is being lost. And so we have this clash between limited and unlimited government, and my fear is, at least in the political sphere, unlimited government is winning. Now, let me bring this all personal, because I've always believed this way, but in terms of, is government a threat, I don't have to kind of look at it theoretically. I am threatened with going to jail, to prison in Oklahoma for 10 years, and getting a $25,000 fine. And I can tell you, I'm not a wealthy guy, but I haven't really thought twice about the $25,000. Because I was involved in a petition drive. Now, almost everybody I talk to says, what on earth are you talking about? How could this be? Well, in Oklahoma, we had the audacity to suggest that government could grow every year, but that we wanted to put a law on the ballot called the Taxpayer Bill of Rights. We also had another petition that would have reformed eminent domain to where they simply could not take private property from one individual and give it to another private individual. Now, they could still take it and use it for public use, which, as libertarians, isn't exactly right either. But at least there's some semblance of sanity to it, and there is a constitutional provision. But we were working to put the eminent domain measure on the ballot, and we were working to put the Taxpayer Bill of Rights, which says that government can grow year to year by population plus inflation. If it wants to grow more than that, it has to go to the voters and get a vote of the people that says, yes, you can grow more. And if it doesn't do that, if it takes in more money, which oftentimes, in good times, the money rolls in the door and government spends every nickel. And then when the times are not bad, but just not quite as good, all of a sudden we need a tax increase. What the Taxpayer Bill of Rights says is we're going to grow at a normal pace. If you've got a reason that the public might happen to agree with for government to grow faster than that, then go to the public and get authorization. Well, there's an awful lot of people who like runaway government spending. And it's not just we were opposed not only by the public employees unions and the teachers unions and what I like to call mommy welfare folks, but we were opposed tooth and nail by the daddy welfare folks too. The big CEOs, the folks who want government welfare for them because of all they do for the economy. We were collecting signatures. They hired a company, an individual out of Oregon, to run what's called a blocking effort. Now,